We speak with Kevin Starrett from the Oregon Firearms Federation about the influence that left-wing politics has had that has made firearm ownership go from easy to hard, and the weakness of politicians who say they'll stand up for shooters when they won't, which is the same problem that we have here with the Liberal and Labor parties.
What is the fella's name on third base?
What is the fella's name on second base?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know. Third base.
Welcome to the Go Use Australia podcast. It's the podcast for Australian shooters who just want the political interference taken out of shooting.
Welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded and Gun Traders Australia. And I have Kevin Starrett with me from Oregon. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay, Kevin, you're with the Oregon Firearms Federation, which is an advocacy group, obviously based in Oregon, just north of California. Now, I had interviewed recently Paul Vallone from Grassroots, North Carolina. He mentioned the influence, I guess the woke or left-wing influence that has crept into Oregon over the past few years. So what I'd like to do is just explore that a little bit further. But first of all, just tell me a little bit more about Oregon Firearms Federation. That is, when it started, who's behind it, what you've done.
We formed the organization in 1998 at the request of a national group called Gun Owners of America. And in Oregon, the institutional gun lobby was essentially giving away the store. I was associated with Gun Owners of America. I was working for them. And they asked me to start a statewide group that would be independent, that would be a no compromise organization. And that's what we did. With their help, we started the organization. And of course, in Oregon, they had never seen that kind of politics before. So it was pretty dramatic change.
That's a really interesting start, because you talked about the established group giving away the store. And I think that comes down, in my view, to people who perhaps well-meaning, but they don't understand political fights, and they don't understand, the fact that they're just fodder in the political sphere if they stand by and think they can, take the sandwiches at the meetings with politicians, and that's how to influence them.
Precisely. They totally did not understand politics. They thought they did, and they thought that the way to achieve things was to make friends and make deals and compromise. And in fact, what was happening is we were losing everything. So when we started the organization, we kind of reinvented politics in Oregon, because we took the position that, look, we have certain rights and you can't have them. And legislators were stunned and flabbergasted, because instead of going and asking them for things, we just generated massive activist outrage. And I can think of example after example where legislators actually came and said, I don't know what's going on here, but I got 2,000 postcards and I'm changing my vote. And it was an absolutely winning strategy. It made us a lot of enemies very quickly, but we didn't care, because the point wasn't to make friends. The point was to make change. And that, at the time, was a very, very winning strategy. It worked quite well for quite a long time.
That is a very relevant message to shooters in Australia, because we've got a lot of, as I said, well-meaning people who think they're doing the right thing, but they're playing a game against established politicians who are far more skilled and really just want to make you go away.
Exactly. And there's a procedure. There's a set, like exactly how they do it. It's like, first they pat you on the head and tell you, yes, we're very interested in what you have to say, but we can't do it until next year. And then it's time after time a reason why they can't do it right now. And, oh, by the way, we'd like you to sit on this committee with us, anything to get you to shut up. And then if you just keep going back and saying, well, thanks very much, but I don't care about that, I want this thing passed, then they'll tell you you're a troublemaker, and then they'll tell you you'll never eat lunch in this town again, and then they'll tell you, I'm going to tell everybody you're trouble. And I had an experience with a legislator who, I had posted something, and he was not an anti-gun guy. He was a pro-gun guy who did something really stupid. And I just made a comment that he'd done it in one of our alerts on social media or something, and he was pummeled. And so he called me furious, screaming. I mean, this is a guy I didn't have much to do with, cursing at me, telling me, this is why you have no friends here, and you don't understand how things are done around here. And I said, look, I don't work for you. And then we exchanged a few curses, and I hung up on him. And about a week later, I got a phone call from his staff saying, oh, Mr. Starrett, the senator just wants you to know that there's a bill you might want to know about. And it was my best friend. I had the same experience with another guy who was the chair of a committee who moved a bill he promised he wouldn't move. We went after him. We lit him up. He said that I was a liar. I was never allowed in his office again. And then soon after that, I was, I don't want to be in your office, my friend. But he killed the bill I went after. And that was like, hey, that's all I care about. You killed the bill. I don't want to be your friend. And it wasn't long after that he was asking me to come back into his office for any one of 1,000 things.
That is such a relevant message for us, and I really appreciate you relaying that to me, because you've actually went through. I think you articulated it very, very well. So let's just go back a little bit. So Oregon, you were telling me before we started this that you moved there in '91.
Correct.
That the main issue at the time, or one of the main issues, was that it was difficult to get concealed carry permits, but pretty much everything else was, it wasn't as though there were barriers up, or, insurmountable barriers to being able to get other kinds of firearms.
Well, one of the biggest problems we had was that localities were making their own rules, and they were allowed to. So we got that changed. And then for the next 15 years, there was bill after bill after bill that was intended to be anti-gun. And we killed almost all of them before they even got to the floor. But I should point out that the very first year that our organization was involved in the legislature, and of course I had been working for a national group called Gun Owners of America prior to founding the Oregon Firearms Federation. And the very first year the Oregon Firearms Federation was active in the legislature, they had a bill which was, very long story, I'll make it short. It basically banned the private transfer, basically shut down gun shows so that only licensed dealers could trade guns and individuals could not. And that had always been legal and still is legal in most of America. So they tried to pass a bill to end the private sale of guns at gun shows. And the bill in its final form was actually pushed by a Republican. The Republicans controlled both houses at the time. And because of the machinations that the bill went through, it was a sure thing. There was no way this bill was going to be killed. And we were told we were the only people opposing it. So the National Rifle Association refused to oppose it. A local, quote, pro-gun group was actually pushing it. And so here we came along, a nobody organization, pipsqueaks, just first year in the legislature. Nobody even had email at the time. And we just pummeled them. And it was a really long battle, but in the end, the bill died by one vote. And it really put us at odds with the rest of the, quote, gun lobby, because they were supporting it. And it also put us on the map because, like, who are these people? And it was all done by a constant pounding of people calling the legislature. And in the end, it was one vote. It was utter pandemonium on the floor when it died, but it died. And that really put us on the map as this kind of like obnoxious bunch of people, but they didn't want to mess with us. So it was a very successful strategy. Of course, remember at the time, the problem then was the Republicans. And then the power has shifted over the last, 20, 30 years. It's become much, much more difficult to get anything done. But in any kind of normal environment, legislators' main goal is to be left alone. And if you don't leave them alone, you can get quite a lot done.
Yeah, how did you mobilize your supporters? How did you communicate with them?
Well, at the time, it was a lot harder than it is now. So, I mean, we were doing this through fax blasts and phone trees and actually even mail, which is, we don't do much mail anymore. A lot of people do, but it's simply too slow. It's a method for raising money, but in the legislature in Oregon, bills can move so quickly that you couldn't even get the mail written, let alone produced and sent out in time to have, and then have people respond to it. Of course, now everything we do is electronic, but one of the things that was happening was just because of the positions that we took, where we were battling not only the anti-gun people, but we're also battling the gun lobby. And so we got a lot of press as a result of that. And because we were outspoken and refusing to compromise, which was unheard of, we got a lot of attention that we wouldn't have gotten had we just been part of the normal scene of people who were going to parties and, trying to cut a deal.
And so also you mentioned before storage laws, that there was some movement on that front too. What was the change?
Well, in up until about 3 years ago, we had no laws of any kind regarding storage. And the power balance in Oregon has shifted dramatically to the left, and so they passed a bill 2 years ago that required that basically everything be locked up all the time unless you were carrying the thing, and utterly unmanageable, extremely dangerous. Put people in really put people in danger. But as I said, there have been so many laws that have been passed in the last couple of years that people completely ignore, that I think a lot of Oregonians don't even know that there's a lockup law. I mean, we have a law now that says every gun dealer has to have a giant sign in his shop that lists all the rules. I've never seen a gun dealer do it. I don't know of any gun dealer who even knows that it's true. And this is what happens. We pass a lot of crap, but nothing's ever enforced because nobody cares.
Yeah. You mentioned also a ban on magazines, that was also in play.
The ban on magazines is part of a measure that was passed by ballot measure, not by the legislature. And that was passed in 2022, but it has not gone into effect because basically we've tied that up in multiple lawsuits. So currently it's technically law, because if you go online and look at the Oregon laws, you will see that ban, but it's not in effect because the courts have placed an injunction on it.
Yeah, you mentioned prior to this that these things had come into play, but they weren't really given effect to because of the legal challenges and probably some political reservations or something.
Primarily the legal challenges. I mean, the Oregon legislature has moved so far to the left since I started working politics in the state that the dynamics are completely different. I mean, ultimately, in the United States and in every state, the understanding is that Democrats are anti-gun and Republicans are pro-gun. But in reality, that's not true at all. In reality, we have one party here, and it's the greed and corruption party. And in Oregon, unlike in other states, for example, in Idaho, neighboring state right next to Oregon, the Republican Party, if there are Republican legislators who behave like Democrats, and many do, the Idaho Republican Party beats them deaf, dumb, and blind. In Oregon, the Republican Party is an amorphous blob that does nothing, and the Republican legislators have become so completely gutless and corrupted that they won't even use the tools they have to stop stuff, which has changed the dynamics for us tremendously, because essentially there is no political opposition. And that's what's largely forced us into court and legal battles, which I do not like having, because when we have a federal case going and it's under appeal, the initial ruling by the federal judge was 100% against us, and it was completely ignorant. I mean, this judge understood nothing. But when a judge does something hideously stupid like that, there's nothing we can do. When a legislator does something hideously stupid, we can go after them. We can primary them. We can mail into their district. We can make their life hell. Can't do anything to judges. But now our options have been greatly reduced, because basically the Democrats run everything and the Republicans refuse. Even when given a clear path to stop things, they won't do it.
You talk about that sort of influence of the left as very much an issue that's been underpinning the problems in Australia for quite a long time, that we've seen almost the disappearance of conservative politics and the rise of the left and an inability of the conservative side to actually rise to the challenge. In Australia, we have the main parties. We have a Labor, which is left-wing, and we also have our equivalent to the Republicans, and this is going to sound a bit odd, but they're called the Liberal Party. Mm-hmm. It's obviously there's a big difference between how you interpret liberal in the US,
sure.
But that's what we have here. There's a few other parties off to the side, and they're both shifted to the left. So Australian shooters have not been in a good position for a while, and it's getting worse. And just to outline, I think some of the Oregon type laws, although probably worse than what you've got, is our state of Western Australia, where they've just changed the Firearms Act. And we have now, in that state, restrictions on the number of firearms you can own, which is 5 or 10, depending on, whether you're a hunter or into competition shooting. They're proposing new storage requirements where if you have a 6th firearm, you're going to need an alarm, and if you have a couple more, you might need a CCTV. It's been law that if you want your license granted or renewed, because we have licenses in Australia, you're looking at mental and physical health checks. We've got another state that is starting to ask questions about whether when you have your license granted or renewed, if you wear glasses or hearing aids. So, and in fact, some of the fees are being charged in Western Australia, for example. I think if you want to transfer ownership of a firearm from one person to another, you're looking at just under 300 Australian dollars, so 250, 200 American.
Yeah. I mean, we see similar stuff in certain states. I mean, right now, Oregon is not as bad as it could be. It will be if this measure takes effect. But if you look at the laws in New York and California and Massachusetts and Connecticut, they're equally insane. Now it's interesting. Obviously, we just had a presidential election where our country moved decidedly to the right. And in states like Oregon, which are very, very liberal, leftist states, I won't use the liberal term because you use it differently, but very, very left-wing Marxist states, they've basically taken the position, we're going to do everything we can to undermine this new president. And in ways that are just bizarre. I mean, hilariously stupid things that they're planning to do. So we may see a positive shift, but the problem that I see politically for people when you have these two opposing kind of party factions is that people who generally share my philosophy, which in the United States are called conservatives, don't really have a stomach for a fight. They really want to be polite. They really want to do everything by the rules, and they're being beaten deaf, dumb, and blind. When the left doesn't get what they want, they will literally go burn down a police station. Whereas the conservatives, the right wing, I'll say conservatives in the United States, although I think it's changing, are horrified by standing up to that and will literally say, look, we'll go along with what they want just because, we can't behave like that. I say, well, wait a minute. You have a vote on these issues. You have to vote no. And but we have to, that we don't want to have a bad example. And that's what goes wrong, is that the left will be vicious, they'll be violent, they'll be dangerous. And the right and the conservatives don't have a stomach for the fight. And they get, constantly smacked around.
That's interesting because, historically, there's been a big difference between, I guess, the history of the US and the British system of governance. And, it sounds like the conservative side of government where you are has almost led towards that British, let's keep the party line going, let's not create any waves. That sounds very British, actually.
Well, things are changing dramatically in the United States because obviously there are new sources of information, and we have always been subject to a small group of institutional media that were completely controlled by a very tiny group of people. And quite frankly, in the United States, you've probably heard the expression that's used here a lot, the deep state, and the deep state is composed of the media and basically the military-industrial complex. So for generations, the Republicans and the Democrats were completely beholden to the people who made bombs. And that's why the United States intervenes all over the world in countries we know nothing about, because war is very profitable. And Republicans have always gone along with this because, by God, it's patriotic. We're the United States. We're going to go save the world, when in fact all we're doing is enriching the bomb makers. Well, now things have changed so dramatically that people who are viewed as respectable people with impeccable conservative credentials are starting to expose that and starting to talk about the insanity of what our policy has been, and the fact that our intelligence organizations work against us, and the fact that, our Secret Service is clearly compromised. The FBI has become a political tool of the left. The CIA has always been involved the CIA is involved in killing Americans all the time. And now people who are respected in alternate media are starting to talk about that and reveal it. And for the first time, when you look at the people who are now involved in the new Trump administration include high profile Democrats. And one of the things that they share, Tulsi Gabbard she's in the military. RFK is a Kennedy family Democrat. What they're all saying is, hey, wait a minute, what the hell are we doing? We're in every war all the time. And is it because we're doing something that's great for the world? No, it's because we're enriching Grumman and Boeing and all these people. And so that has been a tremendously radical shift. And as people who are gun owners, it's been a real interesting thing for me to watch, because the fact is I'm opposed to that kind of behavior. My government should not be intervening all over the world, should not be spying on its own people. But as gun owners, obviously, we're supportive of people who manufacture firearms. But people who manufacture firearms can't really do an effective job of R&D and stuff unless they have military contracts. And so the people we support are actually involved in all of this crap. So from a political standpoint, it's pretty complicated.
Yeah. You raised a few things during that. I mean, you're right. You've got the different segments of influence in this debate. You've got the states, and I'll come back to California and New York in a minute. You've got the media, as you said, and then you've got the corporate sector. Companies like obviously Ben and Jerry's and Levi's, and we've got a few of our own in Australia who are, I guess, drinking the same Kool-Aid. Which is that's the landscape that we're up against. You mentioned California, New York. California, I think, brought in some new taxes which are hitting gun stores there, and New York, of course, very well aware of the restriction on carrying handguns. And there's a few other ones around the state. So it's interesting because in Australia, what tends to happen, politicians usually say, we don't want US gun laws. And I'm thinking, well, there's some gun laws in the US I wouldn't want. I wouldn't want the Californian tax for a start. I wouldn't want, some of these harebrained ideas that are coming up in individual states. But if they're actually saying we don't want the US Second Amendment for a start, that's not even relevant in our context. But equally, if constitutional rights were such an issue, you put it to the vote. That's how a democracy works. So we've got politicians here who are just using that blanket, we don't want to go down that path thing without being at all specific, which is not helping us because we're getting no traction here, and with our politicians, and we have to fight them the way that you were describing.
Yeah, I think we've gotten to the point. I mean, certainly in the United States, if you look at New York, for example, and I'm from New York, I moved to Oregon from New York. So, very familiar with the gun laws there. And basically, I mean, New York may be like the perfect example of a place, New York City, because the rest of the state is not like that, but they're beholden to the city. It's a place that's determined to hurt good people through taxes, through laws, to protect criminals, to elevate criminals. There's an incident going on in New York right now where a Marine Corps veteran intervened in an attack on the subway, and the guy he stopped died. They're trying to put him in jail for the rest of his life when he should actually be getting a medal. It's an absolutely disgraceful situation. But I think that from my point of view in the state of Oregon, at some point, you really have to recognize what the danger and the problem is. Now, in Australia, you don't have a Second Amendment. In the United States, we have it. I mean, it's part of our Constitution, and it's not a complicated amendment. It's very, very short. It's very clear, and it's hard to imagine how it can be misinterpreted. But it is, because there are forces that always want to cripple and hurt people and take away their liberties. And what people have to recognize, and what the Republicans in Oregon refuse to recognize is the magnitude of the problem. And the problem is not that the Democrats and the left have a different point of view. The problem is that the Democrats and the left are, and I know this is going to sound extreme, but it is true, believe me, the Democrats and the left in the United States and in Oregon are avowed violent Marxists who want to destroy society. And if you look at, it's not just gun policies, it's all the social policies are intended to destroy free enterprise, intended to destroy the family, intended to destroy anything that makes sense. The left is there to crush. And the Republicans keep looking at it like, well, we just have a disagreement. No, these people would kill you if they have the chance. And my goal in Oregon in the last couple of years, and it's actually the Republicans in Oregon who hate me because I keep calling them out on this. And I mean, I can point you to a million very vicious attacks on us, my organization and myself, because I refuse to allow the Republicans to get away with it. And there comes a point when you just have to say, look, this is life and death, and we're going to fight by any means necessary because the other side will gladly do that.
That is also a very relevant message for Australia, because we're seeing exactly that happen here on the left. And you're right, it's not just guns; it's other parts of there's other spheres of society, with some of the protests that the left holds. They're vicious, they're violent. They're not here to actually provide a cause. They're here to actually cause harm. That's what they do.
Well, I think the thing that we saw, that you saw, that the world saw, was how we shut down our entire society for COVID. And people, it was worse in other places, but in the United States, people lost their jobs. I had so much personal experience with this because medical freedom happens to be an issue that I'm very involved in. It was the kind of thing where we just destroyed society, the left destroyed society for their goals. And that is where there has to be people standing up and saying, hell no, it's not going to happen.
In Australia, we had very strong border lockdowns. We had very strong public access shutdowns that you could only walk your dog for an hour a day sort of thing, and you had to have a mask on outside. Yeah. In Victoria, where I am, which was it's been touted as the most lockdowns place in the world. I don't know if that's true, but we had long periods of lockdown when people were just starting to ask questions about, really, are we really jumping at shadows here? And they even closed down for a while gun shops, because the Labor governments, left-wing governments, actually had an agreement nationally, the states where they had power to actually shut down gun shops because there was a risk that people would just sort of mad panic and shoot each other.
Oh, well, in Oregon, they shut down gun shops because they shut down every business that they said wasn't, quote, essential. But interestingly, the businesses, so the corner grocery store was not essential, but the big supermarkets were essential. So if you had a big business who had lobbyists, you got to stay open. But if you were a small mom and pop shop who didn't have a lobbyist, who couldn't grease the legislators, you got shut down. And it was horrifying to watch the damage it did. And it just so happened that the people who I associate with in Oregon all uniformly said, screw you, and nobody obeyed. Nobody wore masks, and we went where we were going, and people were horrified. I mean, we went to restaurants and media showed up, and there were people taking pictures of us because we were eating in restaurants. And then when they threw us out of the restaurants, we ate out in the parking lot. And then sometimes we would have elected officials with us when the cops showed up. But I think there was just that spirit of some people who just said, this isn't going to happen. But it was tremendously effective. It was tremendously damaging. And when you think about the kids who didn't go to graduation, or the weddings that didn't happen, or the old people who died alone in nursing homes, because we quarantined healthy people. It was insane. It was on its face, it was insane. But you see this whole mass psychosis that went on, and Oregon was like one of the worst places for it.
I mentioned before I think the negative influences that came into Oregon that actually caused the shift from where things were when you moved there to where things are now. The anti-gun groups that came in What do you mean by that? Which groups and how that manifests itself?
Well, it was just an evolution. Oregon was pretty liberal when I got there. I didn't realize how liberal it was when I moved to Oregon, but for quite a long time, we pretty much held them at bay. And I think that what exactly explains the shift to the left, I don't think I really know completely. I know that the Republicans had a institutional philosophy that you can't, from the time I got there, and it was completely false, that the only way you can succeed as a Republican in Oregon is to be really, really moderate and lean left. And the more they did that, the more they lost over and over and over again. And so it was almost like this just bizarre, like failing policy that they would say, well, we can't win unless we act more like Democrats. Well, the Democrats had candidates to vote for. And so as the Republican Party, the last 20, 30 years, the Republicans in Oregon have become more and more disorganized, more and more willing to sell out. It's a fair amount of corruption. It's really became a matter of, we just want to have a seat in the legislature because we got a cool office and a parking space. And given the opportunity to actually do something good, we'll always make an excuse not to do it. So and there's a lot of reasons that are things that are speculation on my part, that it'd be way too lengthy and complicated to get into. But I think that there were forces within the Republican Party determined to make it as weak and as ineffective as possible, and they did a hell of a job.
Again, I think you could do a copy and paste of that description and apply it to our conservative side of politics. Cool office and parking space.
Yeah, and I think that the what has to be the process to respond to this. I don't see any easy fixes. I don't see it happening quickly. What I do see that certainly in the state of Oregon, and things were different nationally, in the state of Oregon, the problem is the people who claim to be on our side and who are not. There is no way we can move against the enemy until we stop having our tents fragged by our own guys. We got to clean our own house first. We can't put up a building on a location that has a building that's already there and falling down. First, we have to clear that away. So we have to clear that away, get rid of the clowns and the fakers, and confront the people who claim to support our beliefs and our ideology, but are there on the take. And it's ugly when you do that, because now you're hitting the establishment. You're hitting people who think, hey, why are you hurting our guys? Because they're not our guys. And so it's unpleasant, but it has to be done.
I can absolutely relate to that. It again describes the journey we've had here.
Yeah. I think people need to understand how serious the problem is, that we are very close to, well, you've seen it, you've lost your liberties, you've been told you can't leave your home, you can't. People are free, autonomous, they have rights. Those rights were given to them by God. Those rights were not given to them by any government. And when you stand up to that machine, there's always a price to be paid. But the price for not standing up to that machine is a lot greater.
Kevin Starrett from Oregon Firearms Federation. I certainly appreciate your time today. It's been very instructive, as I said, very eerily reminiscent of a lot of the challenges we're facing here. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.